San Sebastian International Film Festival. My name's Len, and I recently joined Climate Spring, working in development. Climate Spring is a global development fund looking at different ways that we can explore the climate crisis through our work in the screen industries. It was set up as a community interest company about 3 years ago by a leading climate strategist, Lucy Stone, and a team of industry experts, including Josh Cockcroft, James Durant, and Victoria Stevenson. We're funded by philanthropic grants and invest in projects so that we can start looking at different ways to push the narrative on climate forward. And without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panelists today. Nerea Ramirez Pires is an environmentalist and a postgraduate in environmental education. She's been part of the environmental movement in Madrid for decades, working with the NGO Ecologistas en Acción and in feminist collectives such as Feministas for Climate and the feminist choir Malva Loca. Nerea works on projects within social and solidarity economy networks, such as the Eco Co-housing project Entre Patios and the Madrid social market. Since 2022, Nerea has been the coordinator of ecofeminism at Greenpeace in Spain. And then we have Eneko Murazabal. He is the head of circular economy and cultural projects at Bilibin Circular. Eneko trained as an industrial designer at the University of Montreal and the Polytechnic University in Valencia. Throughout his career, he's focused on people-centered design, service design, and sustainable development. Currently, he leads circular economy projects in the cultural and industrial sectors at Bilibin Circular. In addition, he's responsible for Basque Green Film, an initiative by the Basque government's Department of Culture and Language Policy, which aims to promote sustainable filmmaking in the Basque country. Eneko is also a director whose short-form film, Planeta Gatik, just premiered at the festival today. And also welcome Ellum, who is a BAFTA-nominated and Oscar-shortlisted writer and director working in film and television. His debut short, Our Kind of Love, was BAFTA longlisted in 2019 and has been screened at festivals worldwide. The film has garnered over 3.6 million views on YouTube to date, and his latest short film, Yellow, was BAFTA nominated in 2024 and shortlisted for the Academy Awards this year too. Elham is also part of
Momentos y puede cambiarnos para siempre a través de la conexión y a donde puede llevarnos la esperanza si nos permite soñar. Con diferentes nominaciones para premios BAFTA
about your role and your organizations and the current projects that you're working on. And then perhaps we go to Eneko first.
Arratsaldeon guztioi. Buenas tardes a todos y todas. Pues bueno, como muy bien me ha introducido Ben, yo trabajo en una consultora medioambiental en la que parte de los... ¡Ay, barkatu! ¿Bai? Yes, bai, barkatu. Arratsaldeon guztioi. Buenas tardes a todas y todos. Me llamo Eneko Murazabal, me ha presentado fantásticamente bien Lynn, pero bueno, actualmente desde Bilibin Circular es verdad que trabajamos bastante en el mundo de la cultura y en concreto en la parte del cine y hay como 3 tipos de actividades que hacemos principalmente. La primera es ayudar a productoras de cine y a directoras y directores a cumplir con los requisitos medioambientales que ahora mismo tienen que cumplir, tienen que llevar a cabo para acceder a fondos públicos y bueno, les ayudamos.
In order to get public funding, we help them with that. Sometimes we help them go beyond that and get green production labels, etc. And in some cases, we've been asked to help in little workshops, in festivals, in labs on how to introduce the climate lens, how to include it, how this could inspire other people, how through the film industry we can foster this debate. And we have organized some workshops on this topic. As Lynn also said, we sometimes, actually quite often, we work with the Basque government and other entities to try and introduce this and include this kind of criteria in public funding. I just wanted to nuance one thing. The short film that has been seen and the festival is Ausquac, Planeta Gatic, will be screened in the fantastic film festival in San Sebastian next year. Yeah, this year.
I should add that the organisers did let me know that there is a drinks session after this to which everybody's invited, and I forgot to mention at the top, which is at Kela Topaginia. Sorry. And I'll remind everybody at the end. That's fantastic, and thank you very much. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing your film if we had not seen it already today. And Elham, would you like to talk about your work?
Hi, everyone. My name is Elham Isas. I am a filmmaker. I was born in Afghanistan, so a lot of my work deals with themes of home, identity, and characters and stories from underrepresented backgrounds. That's kind of what draws me to storytelling. And my latest short film has climate change against the backdrop of a character who's underrepresented. So that's me.
Bueno, pues Arratsaldeon.
Good afternoon. So Lynn has asked us to tell about what we do. I work on ecofeminism in Greenpeace, and it's probably simpler than this word. Maybe you don't know what it means, but it's about including or introducing the need to look at things in a different way, to lead the path for a paradigm change and understand that in the present crisis, social and political crisis situation, we must go to the root of the issues and face the paradigm. Just as we have faced in the past centuries all this, we need a more systemic gaze that pays attention at why what's happening happens. And if we don't do that, we won't be able to find solutions that will fit for everyone in the long term. One of the projects I'm working on currently is what we call ecotopias. It's like utopias, but with the prefix eco. And for that, it means how can we imagine good futures? Now, we have to see what we understand by good, right? But that are actually possible within the limits of our planet. We are very much interested by the idea of how we make the most, or how we apply a lens on things that are already happening right now and that show that other paths are possible. We don't always need to work from scratch. We already have science today that allow us to see what the changes should be. So ecotopias would be to rescue from the present all this information that will allow us to imagine a better future. And it's very interesting to be around this table to talk about what we are going to talk to today with Ellen and Eneko, and see if the film industry allows us or invites us to cultivate that type of imagination and worlds.
Thank you very much. So I wonder if we should start with ecofeminism that you just mentioned, Nerea, and many of the current faces of the climate movement are women and girls and female identifying. Why do you think the climate movement seems to particularly resonate with women? And I'm interested in whether you think these amplifiers of environmental voices manage to engage with wider audiences, and whether or not perhaps there's an opportunity for a step change in the industry in front of and behind the camera.
Es verdad que
It's true that polls have said for decades that women are more aware of environmental issues, and this probably happens in the film industry as well. from ecofeminism and from feminism in general terms, that might be due to the place that has been given to women historically, not because we have a closer relationship or connection to nature than men, but maybe because we have been placed in a place where we become caretakers, and we have had to sustain not just our family, but also sustain the resources around us to afterwards sustain people and care for people. That's what happens after a war, after a climate crisis, after an emergency situation. You need to do that, and we have been there taking care of our families. So it might make sense to think that these narratives will come from female filmmakers, and certainly that gaze change might come from women. But we have to defend that just as women shouldn't be the only caretakers, men should be as well. Well, men, of course, can also introduce relevant and important topics in the film industry, not only women.
Thank you. And opening it up to you guys, do you have anything to add on the role of women in the projects that you have currently worked on?
I wanted to add to what you brought up. It's really interesting that the female gaze has picked up the climate crisis and the stories. And the climate crisis affects everyone, but it doesn't affect us equally. It depends on geography, it depends on gender, and it depends on income. And it's interesting because women, like many other aspects in life, are disproportionately affected by climate change. Like where I'm from in Afghanistan, in that part of the world, women are often in charge of doing a lot of heavy work that works with the natural environment. So going out to get food, get water, bring fuel. So they are a lot closer to the natural environment, I guess, is what you mentioned. And they are also affected disproportionately by climate change in terms of climate migration. Men and women being displaced because of climate change, women are often more vulnerable to violence and other such things. So I guess that kind of brings in the impact. I mean, I'm not a woman, so I don't know exactly in that, but I know it's hard to be a woman, and climate change makes it tougher, I think.
Sí, a mí me gustaría ya,
Okay, I would like to add, and Ellen has just mentioned it, we need to speak about underrepresented voices in general, especially in the world of cinema. It's a fact. It's been identified. And sometimes there's a balance that is sought. But we have a long stretch to go. Many voices haven't been listened to, many viewpoints, many ways of making cinema, and we will discover that in the next decades, because these people have never have access to the cinema, and they've never been represented in movies. If you see the awards in any festival, how many women have won the main cinema awards in the world? You mentioned already the fact that there is a cultural baggage that is evolving, which is part of women's work, and this will be generated by new movies. We will see utopias, climatic lenses. We will see a future that it will be desired, and this may be led by women.
Thank you. So I'm really interested in how you guys are approaching new forms of storytelling in this space, especially your work area with Greenpeace and the graphic novel that you just produced, and also your kind of world-building workshops. Eniko and Elham, your latest short film, and how you started to, move into this space. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've discovered on that journey, and where you even start in looking at this?
I think with climate change, a lot of the times we see climate in documentaries, and we see documentaries as kind of work. It's like, oh, I have to learn something. It's teaching me something. I have to be actively involved. Whereas we wanna, when we're like, oh, I wanna relax, I wanna watch a movie, be entertained. That makes us feel something. And I think a lot of the issue with climate in the cinematic lens is that we need to shift it from documentaries to kind of transition into narrative, which is what I've tried to do with my short film, because I feel like if instead of being taught, we are moved by the concept of climate change through stories that aren't about climate change but inspired by it, I think a lot of people would see it in a different lens. So my new short film that I did, it's called There Will Come Soft Rains. And that is about a girl, a Pakistani girl in London, who's so worried about the rising sea levels that she digs up her father's grave to move him to higher ground. And this is where the climate crisis is mixed with character crisis. And that's when it becomes a compelling storytelling form. And that's when people are like, oh, this is interesting, because we think that we have to watch documentaries to learn something, but some of the greatest movies have the best messages. And while we're being entertained, we're learning, and it changes us in so many different ways. And I think that's what new filmmakers or successful filmmakers should focus on, where climate, it shouldn't be this post-apocalyptic world of, oh, everything is going to end. It should be told through, I think, through a lens where it's the human story being affected by our planet's story, by the crisis. Climate crisis and character crisis meet together, and that is what compels and makes people feel something. And I guess when you feel it, it goes to your heart a lot quicker. And when it gets there, it goes to your brain, and you start changing your behavior, start looking at Earth with more respect and the way we treat it. So that's how I think. That's how I try to do. Will approach this new project.
That's great.
Bueno,
In the workshops I facilitated, in order to inspire people who are developing a cinema project or writing a script, when I explain how we can use the climatic lens, and I love the word lens, because I always start my workshops with this proposal, with the metaphor. Let's use glasses, the lenses. Let's see our stories. Let's see our script and the characters we are writing about and we are developing with these lenses. This is the climatic crisis lens, the social lens. And I propose it like a game, as it's like a game, because I don't want to dramatize too much. In my short experience, when dealing with people who write and who do storytelling, each writer is completely different. And the motivations, the energy that they use to develop their projects, the starting point, the things happening in their brain when they start with a new story. This is so different from one person to the other. Some people are inspired by the news. Some other people are inspired by their biography, by their experience. Each person says that the starting point of the project was completely different from others. I'm an engineer. I'm not an artist. So I say, I'm an engineer, but I will play a game. Let's enjoy it. With these lenses, let's see if you discover a new facet, a new viewpoint in your script. Could be about the the detail, the decor, something new to a nuance given to a character, something different that they could add through these lenses, or should be maybe an action or part of an action that will be changed and modified with these lenses, with these climatic glasses. So that's the introduction to the workshop. Talking about methodology, the work that has been carried out in the UK, Albert and Planet Placement, the different manuals that have been published there, and also through Julie's Bicycle's publications around creative climate justice. These are two inspirations for me. These are tools, practical tools that help me a lot to go down this new alley, to inspire writers, storytellers, and have this climatic touch in their work. I would like to know how was Ecotopias, the comic in Greenpeace. How did you do it? Ecotopias, using the language of a comic, and I recommend it to you because it's very good. Yes. It was the experience of the narrative creation, different narratives and different stories. Several months ago with Ciberri, a publishing house in the Basque Country, we published a graphic novel with different illustrators. The challenge was that each one had to generate a story. Some of them do not do that. They only draw cartoons and comics. So it was a real challenge. What about the methodology? You spoke about the glasses, about the lens. Talking with people who deal with climatic topics in the cinema, we realize that we lack information. It's about climatic literacy. It doesn't exist when you go out of college. You know what climate change is, but you don't really know how an ecosystem works. We think that climate change is just disasters, catastrophes, but it's much more than that. It's a process of accumulation. You can't really feel it. It's like the frog being boiled little by little. So it's very difficult to show. With the illustrators, what we did was to tell them the bad situation of our planet at the moment. For several hours, we explained what is this about, and they wanted to know more. They were informed about climate change, but many other things happening on our planet at the moment. We had a session on utopias. What is a utopia? How this concept has evolved with time. These were faraway places. Utopias are there, and I'm here. It's very far away from me. But maybe in history, utopias have been more real. How can you build a utopia? Do you only build them because of your time and your space? Because there's a step-by-step method. Or you have a goal, and then you only pick what is relevant towards your utopia. And then we played a game also with them, with humor, with drama, with love. Each illustrator had to adopt a style. And we did a list, we drafted a list. What is important for this change of gaze? This list is really interesting. It's not just a list like saying we have to stop the climate change. No, how to live different, change our habits, our behaviors, meet with different people, human things that you can do in your daily life. It's not just explaining coldly what climate change is. It was a collective process. In all the sessions on about the novel, they insisted on the collective effort. They were together, and then each illustrator went home and created her own script. But at the beginning, it was a collective effort. And we also included elements that we don't normally use when talking about the climate change. What is an ecotopia linked to health? How would a health system be organized in the future according to this utopia? It's not just us in our balcony with the little with our tomatoes and our lettuce. So let's imagine other levels. Some stories speak about the connection between bioregions. We gave them elements and just pick one or pick two and then use them in your storytelling and the cartoons and the comic. And the result was very good. And please read it because it's interesting.
Delay with the translations there. That's great. So, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it feels like many of us are aware of big films like An Inconvenient Truth or, Don't Look Up, and things that really look at kind of dystopian futures. And obviously at Climate Spring, we're really interested in finding ways to show what the future could look like when we've solved these problems and how we could play out, these solutions that currently exist over time. I'm interested to know whether there are any examples from your own language markets of positive outlooks on the future. We're consulting on a Spanish TV series called Vice and Morales, which is coming out next month. But I wondered if there are any that you can mention, and if not, how do you think they need to be shaped in order to begin to address this challenge? And maybe starting with Enrique.
Sí, esta es una pregunta que a veces también...
Okay, this is a question that is often posed in workshops. I loved one of the answers. One of the working teams. Well, somebody said, okay, these utopias, these films showing us alternative futures, provoking futures, these movies which help us ask us questions and imagine a new world. Maybe we won't find that in mainstream cinema, in popular films. At least now, we find this in the periphery, in independent movie. They mentioned a movie by a Catalan director from the 90s. I don't remember the name of the director, but the title, Cariño, he mandado a los hombres a la luna. Darling, I sent men to the moon. So these scientists sent all the men of the Earth to the moon, and they have to organize the life in Barcelona and in the Earth without men, just women left. I loved the example. Okay, I'm going to watch that. And it's a very underground type of movie, but it's very fresh, very refreshing, provoking film, and I loved that reflection. Let's look in the margins. Let's look in the periphery. Many, many things have already been done. These projects were already tuned up to this frequency. Darling, I sent all the men to the moon. Just watch it. It's fantastic.
In answer to your question about whether the language from my region, how it deals with climate, it doesn't. I come from a country that has had war for the better part of 5 decades. Since I've been alive, the Afghan flag has changed 15 times. That country has no space for narrative of any sort, let alone climate. We suffer from poverty, we suffer from war, we suffer from human rights injustices. So there is a lot of issues that are more immediate. And that's the problem because, of course, the ultimate issue is climate change because it affects the home we live in and therefore affect all of us. But my country doesn't have space for that. And it comes back again, my country doesn't even have a film industry. And it comes again to representation in regions where we do have film industries, we do have access to be able to tell those stories and to tell those stories from parts of the world that aren't in a position to do it themselves. Like I said, climate change affects everyone, but it doesn't affect us all equally. Gender was one, geography is another one. Some regions, some countries, they don't have time, the money, and the industries to help them educate themselves about climate change and educate themselves about how to treat climate change. I remember I was in Afghanistan last year, and I was walking with my cousin, and he had a Coke bottle, and he went, whoop, and he just chucked it on the street. And I was like, oh, what? Because it's comes back to education. It comes back to them being part of a world where littering isn't a thing that they think about. It's more, how do I get a job? How do I make money? How do I feed my family? How do I, because Afghanistan is struggling for women's rights right now. Women aren't allowed to go to school. There's a lot of problems there. And not just Afghanistan, a lot of from the East, there are a lot of other problems that trump climate change when it shouldn't. Climate change is the ultimate problem. We should all work collectively. But that's a problem, that's the issue. So that inequality in representation will, if you bring in representation, bring in stories from that part of the world that you have the power to tell, those people will watch those stories and they will learn. So unfortunately, that's the situation that my country is in.
Thank you.
Bueno, a mí me cuesta un montón también buscar siempre.
I find it hard to find examples of this, and I've been thinking about it since yesterday. Examples of the cinema. Well, yes, I make a mental note with the one that Eneko mentioned. I'd like to mention Itziar Boyain and her film on olive trees in Olivo. And I think she's very committed to the environment and climate, and it's good to mention her, even if her films are not necessarily environmentally focused as her main topic, but she always tackles somehow the topic. But it's not a utopia, no. So I always try to find films that, even if their main topic, their main theme is not climate itself, they still show something interesting on how we can change the way we do things. And recently I saw one film. It's El 47. It would be translated as The 47, literally. It's a story on the struggle, not environmental struggle, but collective struggle. And the end is positive. It shows how migrant people coming to Barcelona from different places that work on those employments that help the city survive every day, how they manage to dignify what they do, their lives, their jobs, and their services they get to live in a decent way. So it's not strictly environmental as a topic, but they do talk about very relevant things that concern us all.
Much. So I'm understanding that, those of us who have the opportunity have a real responsibility to communicate as best we can the situation that we're in and the solutions potentially moving forward. And I wanted to ask you, Eneko, coming from your background in industrial design, what changes in society do you think that advances in green technology will have? And is there anything that you're particularly excited about with a view to, potentially taking some ideas and putting it into our work?
Yes, when I read your question yesterday, I said, let me think a technology. Because my answer, honestly, it would be that for me, personally, there's not a technology that I think will be key to have a sustainable future. I think that the real revolution, as Nerea started to say, is how we do things, not so much our technological inventions, it's just our approach, the way we do things. The paradigm change, the mindset change is the real revolution we need. From my personal and modest experience and training, I wouldn't bet on a technological solution, but rather a social solution. That being said, no, I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it here.
That's great, and I was kind of expecting that answer, so thank you. Okay, well, let's talk then about some of the ingredients that we're drawn to when working on our projects that look into the future. Are there elements that you really focus on and that you think are really, really important to tackle as we look at kind of the societal shifts moving forwards? Anyone? Whoever would like. Or I can rephrase it a little bit. What is the most important thing that you're trying to get across in your work in this space? And what are the sort of feelings and ideas that you want to communicate to an audience?
I think for me personally, it always just comes back to representation, especially from where I'm from. The stories that my stories aren't being told. Our, people from minority backgrounds aren't being shown. The stories in front of camera and behind camera just aren't there, and it comes back to climate change. People who have to deal with the biggest impacts of climate change are often those who have been marginalized for centuries because of systemic racism. And you can see that lens in every facet of life. So for me personally, I like to tell stories that go back to representation. Like my film is about a Pakistani girl who has to dig up her father's grave. It's a Pakistani Muslim girl, especially as a Muslim in an Afghan, like in our culture, like digging up some loved one's grave is a complete no-no. But this girl is forced to do that because of climate. So again, it goes back to the fact that I chose a Muslim girl for this story means that climate change is pushing humans to do things that are unnatural. And that goes back to this compelling storytelling of putting the climate crisis with character crisis, making that arc more pronounced and more, instead of teaching, more trying to make you feel. So again, representation. If I was going to show, well, here is the difference. If there was no representation in this film, the stakes wouldn't be as high. She has to go to the mosque and she has to speak with the priest. And the priest is like, what the hell are you doing? Absolutely not. Don't do that. That's representation feeding into the story. That's a certain culture, a certain outlook on life that makes it richer, makes the story richer, makes you feel more, because now there's this girl who not only has to deal with this thing of rising sea levels, she also has to dig up her father's grave, which she just cannot do. How does she do it? And then that makes you go, oh, what's going on? What's going to happen next? So again, it's richness of representation in storytelling that elevates storytelling, I think.
Thank you. And Nuria, so you also have a background in education. What are the things that you wish a wide audience could know about the climate crisis?
Bueno, yo voy a intentar como plantear las ideas centrales que yo creo que estamos intentando.
I'll try to talk about the main ideas that we want to convey to the biggest audience, because in Greenpeace you can imagine that we have so many campaigns, so much work to do every day on different topics, but maybe with this idea of looking to the future, I think the message is what Donna Haraway says in her book, that we shouldn't believe the game is over, and how dangerous it is for us as human beings to think that it is game over. All polls carried out among youngsters talk about huge percentages of young people who don't believe in the future, have no hope, have lots of anxiety, and when we ask them, what do you expect from the future, say, I expect nothing. So the author, talks from this position of letting other people decide for you because you think there's nothing worth doing. So we try to launch and convey this idea that the game is not over. We keep playing. We are still active and we want to rescue possible things. So first idea, game is not over. Don't think that the game is over. Second idea, let's rescue things that happen every day here and in other places. It's not us who say it's not game over, but we have real examples that show that we can still do things and live better. And the third idea is how we do this from the privileged position we have, because we live in a privileged situation. So the message has to be conveyed in the correct way, in the proper way, and focusing on the most vulnerable people and on the present. Not the future, but the present. Let's be aware that we are talking from a privileged position, but we work for everyone. You asked before about the challenges in our messages, and I think those are the challenges. And of course, we need a list of solutions that already exist, but it's we want to look forward as humans.
Thank you very much. So in the environmental movement, Greenpeace has been known for its spectacular actions to raise awareness for environmental problems. And I was just wondering whether you all think that audiences respond better to spectacle or normalization. I don't know if one of you would like to, would be ready to go first.
Sí, es un tema... Ay, perdona. ¿Ibas a empezar tú? Es un tema que siempre suele...
Yes, we always talk about this, the constant exhibition of impact images. Does it move? Does it make people act? Or is it in a way an aesthetic? I mean, and when we talk about representation and the images we use, I think we need a balance. We have to dose what we show, because impacting images work, but not if you use them constantly, because people become immune. So from a communication point of view, I think this is an ingredient that you must know well and dose correctly. But I think it was Susan Sontag who described this phenomenon many decades ago. And it's true. That's the way it is. And somehow you never know what's going to light the sparkle and what's going to strike the attention of your audience. You never know what's going to make people react. Probably it's a combination of something spectacular and something not so spectacular, but probably inspiring, like seeing people doing things collectively or recovering traditional ways of doing things that have been lost and you recover them. I think it's a combination of ingredients, in my opinion.
Great. Nerea, would you like to answer?
Bueno, creo que Neko,
I totally agree with the Neko. And it's a very interesting topic. I was very much interested in your opinion when we wrote this graphic novel. We talked about it because in the different stories in novels, there's a process where they talk about conflicts, loss of privilege, etc. But we were already there. That was already our starting point, according to our authors. So we were discussing all the time and thinking, well, maybe this is too naive. There are no huge conflicts or problems. I mean, they're small. There are conflicts. Life is conflict, of course, but there's not something spectacular. And of course, in life, we solve conflicts in a different way, but there's not that huge conflict that's the center of the story as in usual novels. And we wondered, can we only do conflict stories because otherwise they don't work? Because it becomes too naive or they don't hook your audience. I do believe that balance is part of the recipe, but we have very few examples of storytelling that doesn't focus on big conflicts or on apocalyptic dystopian futures. So, yes, I wanted to know what you think, because that's what you do, storytellers, and I wanted to know how you see it. Can we only tell stories on conflicts?
Question, do impactful images sustain? And often I feel that it's always the characters that compel you. An impacting image is good, it works in capturing the attention, but it doesn't sustain. You need something deeper, you need that compelling character, you need that compelling emotion, the compelling story. A lot of the most powerful films that we have made as humankind are the most simplest stories, simplest ideas that reach to you in the most silent of ways. So it all just comes back to the stories. It comes back to the characters. Do we relate to the character? And bringing it down back to climate is, I think that I don't know, but I think this one of the solutions is using climate as a character rather than a concept in a film. And I think maybe that we can relate to it better. But honestly, I don't know the answer to your question. Maybe it's one of the solutions to try and make someone feel something about climate.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because at Climate Spring, we recently published Lucy's Climate Guide to Storytelling, which kind of is an entry point into people who are interested in tackling this area as far as we see it. And we split the slate into three. We looked at truth and justice stories, so why we're here, how we got here, which lends itself often to dramas and police, procedurals and things that uncover the truth. We looked at transition stories, so stories that acknowledge that we're in the messy middle of figuring this all out right now, and how characters are, working together to emerge through it, and that can come in all sorts of, guises. And the third area we were looking at is also world building. So how can you take some of the solutions, that are already available and play them out over time? And it's been so interesting for me, new to this area, to look at this, because one of the things that we try and focus on at Climate Spring is finding a way through that has pragmatism but also hope. And I wondered, we spoke a little bit a while ago about the kind of emotions that come up for people when they're looking at the climate crisis and they're looking at climate storytelling. And I wondered if you wanted to share any thoughts about how it makes you feel, how you, maybe we've already answered this question, how you want your audience to feel. What is the most helpful kind of thing that we can translate? And that can go to anybody.
I can go in. I think a lot of the power that I find in telling climate in this film that I made is there was power in my role as a filmmaker in making that little bit of change. So in terms of production, when we were shooting our short film, we tried to make it as green as possible. So these are just practical elements of making stories that push for climate change, climate perspective. Making our film was green, it was a vegan catering. We made mindful decisions of where we shoot. So we were shooting in different locations. It was a 4-day shoot, but lots of locations. But the challenge was, how do you shoot close to each location so you don't have to drive too much? So you don't have to put mileage on the car and then more exhaust fumes, etc. So a lot of that is, as a filmmaker, when you decide to tell stories about climate change, and when you, because I know Climate Spring championed us, gave us funding to make this story. So that gave us power to tell a story in a certain way, in a certain pragmatic way, which we did, which we honored. And that's when it comes back to the industry, the film industry. They need to champion filmmakers and stories that are more about climate change, because then it makes a new culture in making films, making it more green. I'm sure now moving forward in my other films, if I'm lucky enough to make more, I'll be mindful of my catering. I'll be mindful of where we shoot and how far we travel between locations. I'll be mindful of sending communications that aren't by paper. And all of these things that I've learned while making a film about climate change. So it's an educational process for me. So I guess a lot of the education comes from doing. It's practicing what you preach. And Climate Spring giving us the power to practice and make this film gave me the power to learn and gave me the power to make something that hopefully I'll keep in my skill set as a director moving forward in projects of whatever nature, bigger or smaller. So that's another thing. So also thank you for that.
Yes, and so it feels like in production there's a real new green wave kind of coming through, and obviously Aniko, you work with storytellers on the production side. I'm interested in how that area has evolved since you've started working in that space, and what are some of the challenges still ahead?
Pues
Well, in Spain, public funds for cinema production have included sustainability criteria in 2021, 3 years ago, basically. We have production companies in cinema productions, and they were already asking for this information. They wanted to understand what was their environmental impact. They wanted to learn and to apply new ideas. And other production companies are more reactive, and they are doing a lot of things now. Yes, so there's a green wave, and some of the producers are leaders, and they are inspiring others along the way. But there are great contradictions. The greater impact of a film, a feature film, what is the climatic impact? In Spain, for instance. Well, the greater environmental impact of these movies, between 70 and 80%, is traveling and transportation. To take people from one region to another, and movements, traveling in cars, vans, lorries, to take people and material from one side, or from one location to the other. It's very difficult. We can reduce that footprint. You can make radical decisions. Now I'm helping a production. It's 0 flights. Nobody's going to fly. For this shooting, use the train, buses, whatever. No flights. That's a decision. It's a radical decision, but it's doable. But that's not the vast majority of the cases. I do believe, and that's the question I normally ask in events like this one, and this is a topic of today, the greater contribution of cinema to climatic crisis and eco-social crisis is not to reduce the carbon footprint during the shooting or producing the cinema movie, but in the stories that are told. That's the contribution, the type of stories. Of course, our shootings should be greener. People who write stories, or in fact their pens, are weapons. Like when you're writing down, you know the cost of what you're writing. You don't say 5 helicopters crashed into the building. I know it's very expensive. I'm not going to write about helicopters. So if people who produce and write about cinema are aware of the climate impact, they will have this project in mind with this lens, and they will write with this in mind. In James Bond movies, it's impossible. They will go to 5 different countries in the world because that's James Bond. But I don't have experience with big studios, but there's another type of cinema which with a different hand, with a different pen, with a different keyboard, and We need to know the environmental implications, and these people include that in their writing, and we will see that in their stories. This is just for environmental impact. It's the climatic lens in the writing.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Okay, so we're nearly at the point where we'll come to you guys for any questions you have. And I did want to just ask one question to you, Nuria, because in your biography, it mentions that you're also part of a climate choir. I was interested in how you feel that collective experiences, are important, how important they are for everybody at the moment, because I have never heard of that and it sounds fantastic.
Well, it's a co-feminist climatic, co-feminist. But there are very, very few songs speaking about climate change. Eco-feminist choir. Yes, the world of music and how it tells the story of the climate change. It connects with emotions in the choir. I do participate in many other spaces, not just in the choir, but sometimes I want to be in places where I can find joy. I want to be happy. I want to enjoy. I want to be in my neighborhood. I want to participate and to be there, to take part and to share with joy. When I share spaces with women's groups, women who are suffering in their lives, they define joy. What is joy? The space for resistance. They cannot take us joy out. They cannot steal joy out of us. It's a collective decision. It's not an individual decision. Sometimes it's very difficult to maintain that joy, but collectively they look for joy, and I'm attracted by that. The sustaining joy in a collective way, and hope, which is not an emotion, but still, both ideas are leading me. How to convey joy and how to convey hope. I was listening to Olga Rodriguez. She's a journalist in armed conflicts. She's very well known in Spain. She spoke about the obligation that we have as activists to convey hope. It's our obligation. Let's inspire with joy. That's the idea of ecotopias. We need that. We need hope and joy. It's an emotion that allows you to make progress. It's a positive and very powerful emotion. It's very difficult to find sometimes in narratives and stories dealing with climate change. You can feel it and find it in Unfalling. Unfalling, there's a moment in this movie where you can see this little stop and joy and happiness moment. Little touches of joy, hope, and happiness. Fear moves you and pushes you. And we activists, we say that fear moves people around. But I'm moved by joy, by happiness. I want to be enjoying what I do, and that moves me and pushes me on.
This has been such an interesting discussion, I think, so much about imagining better futures, acknowledging our responsibility as storytellers, the privilege of that, considering the intersectionality of the issues around climate and how cognizant we should be in kind of moving that forward, and also remembering to take joy in being here and our collective futures. I'd like to open it up to questions. Would you like to go first? I think perhaps there might be somebody coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Thank you. This is the first festival I've been back since '53. And my memory of '53 and before was we used to have a section called Social Change, where we used to do migration, environment, or gender, depending what issue it is. I think that would be a good thing to revisit. And also in 2007, we were very close to having a green section of the festival, which was it was the 20th anniversary of the Brundtland Report, and we were going to look at feature films over those 20 years. And maybe that's, again, another thing that's worth looking at. On the scenario stuff, there's a massive academic work on that through the Telus Institute, 20 to 30,000 people working on the scenarios that go around the future. I'm sure Greenpeace has been doing similar things, but it may be worth looking at that. And then the final thing is UNICEF, with the world's largest classroom, have produced a large series of comics on Agenda 2030, the SDGs. I had the pleasure of writing the one on how Father Christmas found out about climate change, but they're for much younger audiences, but they're very much an online resource which you can just download.
Thank you very much. That is a set of really interesting things to look up. Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question to our panelists?
Lo primero, agradeceros porque
First, thank you, because having climate change in a conversation forum around such a useful tool as a film industry. I've been working for 30 years in the environmental and energy sector. And like Nerea said, we work a lot with young people. We've realized there's a change. Young people who are about to start university, they are the future, but they are already the present, the ones who will turn things around. And in the past 2-3 years, just before Ukraine's war, we reached a peak point where the climate topic was working, and since then it's going down. And we do all sorts of things with them. We play different games, but they are disenchantment, disillusioned, disappointed, and disconnected. And it doesn't matter if we talk about, even if we talk about actors, rappers, they talk about, sustainable objectives, and so we work with storytelling. We must sweeten a little bit the messages we send, because all the apocalyptic stories become too hard, but we don't manage to hook them. Yes, you talked about personal stories. I do believe feelings play a key role, but we are not finding the right way to do it. And I think we bring this critical language down to the street language, and we are still not getting their attention. We don't manage to motivate them. I am very optimistic, but I must tell you that we are facing a moment of extreme pessimism. We cannot tell them that everything is positive, because, I mean, they know it's not. And we cannot be too catastrophistic, but I'd like to congratulate you for this forum. I think there are few movies tackling this topic. Some of them tackle it sideways, but we are eager to hear your ideas, because we are there training, educating young people, and it's good to make them see a movie, but they must relate to it. And if in 1 minute you don't catch their attention, that's it. They're gone. You lose them. The world is moving at a huge pace. And I think climate change impacts everyone, richer, poorer, with homeless. And I've taken some mental notes, and we'll try to apply everything I've learned today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hola, nada, también agradecer.
Hello, yes, I would also like to thank you for this space for conversation. I think it's very much necessary at present times. I come from Central America and the Caribbean. I am from Costa Rica, although I've been living here for a few years now. And I think that climate change depends also on where you live. In Central America and the Caribbean, where biodiversity is huge, we can sense and see quite easily the effects on many of our communities. And there are positive productions in this region, community productions from different communities, racialized communities, maybe not what we usually see, but some short films, some animation films, some documentaries, and some films, like you said, don't have it as a central topic, but they still tackle it through their storytelling. We are now creating a platform for creative industry in Central America and the Caribbean. And part of our platform coordinates a network that's called Latin Green for Latin America. And it works on training journalists on climate change. That's what they do. They train journalists on climate change. And we want to work on that from the audiovisual point of view, because there's a need for literacy on this topic. It's not easy to talk about climate change if you don't know about it. And conveying those messages to the new generations is a thing. We must find formulas that attract them. It must be, I think, constructive and positive, because if we only launch catastrophic messages, they might think there's no hope. And it's through utopia that you build the future, that you build the world. So we must hold a positive space for that, I think. We are going to start to build our own protocol of green shooting. In many of our countries, we don't have the carbon emissions that others may have in a developed world, in developed countries. So we cannot ask the same things. But I think it will be good to create our own protocols adapted to our realities. I also believe that climate change cannot be isolated from other inequalities. This is something that has been mentioned today as well, because everything is intertwined. The wealth distribution has an impact on that, but it's also related to equality, diversity, feminism. And in our storytelling, I think we must include different topics, not isolated topics. And we shouldn't talk only from the point of view of the developed countries, because it's actually in the underdeveloped or less developed countries that we are going to suffer more the consequences of climate change. Thank you very much.
Sí, a ese respecto.
Yes, on that note, I agree with you in the last things you said. I agree with you on the last things you said. And Nerea talked at the beginning of how important it is to apply a systemic lens. Climate change really is a symptom of the way the dominant part of the planet has been organized for the past 500 years. And I'll explain this. Climate change has been led by the extractivist, capitalist mentality that wastes and extracts with no limit, without measuring. And when material and energy resources of these countries that started with industrial development, then when they went on extracting in other countries, and those resources were stolen, quite clearly. So the systemic mindset that has led us here is capitalism and colonialism. And I know it's complicated to start to talk about it here. But if you want to go to the roots of the problem, I think that's it. And this can be inspiring for filmmakers that write from a privileged point of view that we must be aware of. And maybe it's not so inspiring for young people. Maybe for young people we should do it in a different way. Let's not forget joy, hope, and a possible better future. But we must also talk about the reality. You talked about it, and I agree, this systemic vision Nerea talked about at the beginning is crucial. Yes, I had made a mental note on something that I didn't mention, and you did, and it's crucial. At the very beginning, we were saying why we should have women in our film industry, what can women bring to the industry. And I think that to change the paradigm, we need diversity. We need different gazes, different looks on the world. We cannot do it alone. Not only women, we need women, but we need everyone and all the kinds of diversity, because storytelling is mainly done from a Western point of view. And rescuing this from other places gives us more information. And you talked about how to do films from other places, and yours is much more, there's much more biodiversity where you live than here. So yes, in Greenpeace, we believe in young people's diversity. That's what we try to include. And I don't work with young people mainly, but they should be the ones to decide what's interesting for them. And someone also mentioned something along the lines that of what we did when we created our list. There's a reparation, but there's also a memory. We talk a lot about the future, but it's also important to remember what we have done in other territories of our greed. And this should be put on the table to recover the memory and to repair. We're talking about historic justice too. And these are elements that can be present in these new storytellings and new narratives. Thank you very much, because I think you allowed us to talk about criteria we didn't tackle today.
¿Yo no? Sí. No, nada, quería decir.
I'm very happy with what you just said, new narratives, not to always have the conflict at the core of the story. And I feel very much related. I've been shooting for 5 years a documentary, and I kept saying, please let us do something different, not just for documentaries, also for fiction, both. So many catastrophes. Let us have a more poetic look through a journey, focusing on characters. It's on the Amazon, and it's much more than a conflict. There are people, when you live with them, then you stay there for a while, you realize all the stories behind the curtain. And I think those stories are actually a tool, a vehicle, a way to make the audience feel something and to engage also the political side of our society. And yes, I think it's very important to try and find this balance. I think it's possible, and I think this can lead to powerful things. So I think that's the key, and thanks for calling it New Narratives and for giving us a space for this.
Hola, buenas tardes. Bueno.
Hi, everyone. I think what you're saying is fantastic, but have a look around. How many people are there in this room? So I'd like to do something next time from a point of view that's not your topic. Maybe you could bring 10 young people. I'll bring 2 colleagues. Or if you want, I can bring from home a person from Poland or someone who's going from Ukraine, who's going through huge problems. I mean, we don't need to go very far to do our movies and films. I'm telling you, you can do extremely interesting films with what we already have here. And about the role of women in cinema, I did a short film 5 years ago. You haven't seen it yet because it has not been shown in San Sebastian, only at a cultural center called the Michelena. So storytellings must be done from now on, maybe be more people, more of us, more together, those of us who work with art or within the institutions, like my colleague here, and we know each other already, and people who work in culture or whatever, so that we all together turn this utopia, this unknown future, into something real. Because if we don't react now, it will be very difficult. I just wanted to share this reflection, but from a joyful point of view, and with a lot of love. But I'm quite critical, because if we don't try and see who cares about it, because I've had solar screens for 2 years in my home, solar panels, and I've had to become a solar technician so that we can involve more the next generations. But let's hope to be more of us and maybe bring some more people to our next meeting. What do you think? Do you agree?
Absolutely. Bring your friends next time.
It's been a real pleasure to share this session with you with this general concern in mind. I'm an artist too, and I have links with the scientific world and climate change and everything. There's a great concern amongst scientists. It's about dissemination. Everybody's aware of the situation of our planet and the dramatic consequences of climate change and what is the near future. But there's a great difficulty for this message to be conveyed, and in order to convince people, because scientists are very cold. Researchers don't know how to communicate, and sometimes figures are abstract entities, especially at big scales. These figures lose their value. 1,000 is okay. Millions that's too big for us. So we're lost in the figures, in the facts and figures. So it's a cold discourse. We need to be more emotional and to reach people. Many people think it's not my problem. It's a problem of communication and dissemination. As scientists cannot convey the message, art can do it. Art is the avenue to emotionally involve spectators and viewers and people, and to be closer to people, to reach people, to touch people. In general, art moves in a different reality plane, which is not determinant. It's not significant today. We live in a society with big privileges, but big consortia are also involved in the artistic world, and we artists are at the back of the room. We have little leverage power. Most of the big ideas crash against the wall of the cinematographic industry. It's difficult to develop your cinema project and make it visible. It's difficult to reach the society with our movies. There's a contradiction between the world of ideas, which is very rich and it's fantastic, the world of associations, and this movement is able to move people and push people, and then this glass ceiling on top of it. These ideas cannot be conveyed and communicated. But using new technologies, it would be possible. But new technologies are in the hands of big consortia, and they're not interested a bit on climate change. There's this glass ceiling that we need to break. But future is our youngsters, our kids. But youngsters don't go to watch movies. They read very, very little. They're not interested to have information. They don't need us. They don't need. They just need to consume and to buy and to have objects. And we are speaking amongst us. We never get out of our circle. We'll need to fight against this. I'm still an optimistic person. I think that change is possible. But it's in the hands of artists. There are fantastic ideas around. They have the possibility to break the wall, break the ceiling through art, through dissemination. And we need to communicate those ideas. I think we have future. The best ideas are to come, are still to come. And each of us, we can go to Amazonia, we make short films, we make animations, we are struggling and we are fighting at all levels. But we need the help of big companies and big consortia. We need to have access to a platform that gives us more visibility. We do share all these problems. We need more tools.
Yes, that's a really interesting contribution. Thank you very much. And I think we all have different experiences and, working in this space and with artists and with, commissioners. We are finding in the UK that whilst I don't disagree with what you're saying about needing to, move through a glass ceiling, even in the last 3 years of Climate Spring emerging as a company, obviously my colleagues have had a lot of different conversations with commissioners, and I think on the whole the trend at the moment in the UK is very hopeful in that most of the conversations we have is about being open to the idea of looking at this area, and especially in conjunction with the artist voices coming up and people saying, actually, I really want to work out how I can say something in this space. Oftentimes the question that they're still asking themselves is how and what, and how do you do it in a way that is not going to do more damage than good. And I think there's some questions around that, also might be worth us each reflecting on in our own kind of practice and area of the industry. There's a question over here.
There was a consortium for the original Earth Summit in '92 of all the major TV networks across the world. And most of them produced documentaries which were seen by about 1 million people because it was all depressing. The one that made something like 10 million viewers was a series of consumer-orientated TV series which looked at your home, looked at travel, looked at things which people were doing and what were the best ways to do it, what were the particular things they could buy that would be greener and whatever. And I think some of that needs to be fed in, and some of it is done through project placement and things like that in films and whatever, but more about where people are and not where we'd like them to be, and giving them solutions to how they can live their life a little bit more sustainably might help a little.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have time for maybe one more question if there are any left. Did you have one? Yeah. That's great.
Nada más un apunte.
Just a comment here. When asked, is there a future technology that we could use to modify the current situation? In fact, I don't know if technology is there to help, but what seems obvious to me, and we have to insist on it, is education, basically. Basic education, general education. That's the key. If we don't change our way of educating people, if we don't succeed in educating people around climate change, we won't be able to transform our future. I live in a country where 26% of the territory is protected. We even sell carbon credit. We are zero carbon at the time, so quite virtuous. But we were educated and we were raised in contact with nature, constant contact. Of course, I live in Madrid now, but we were educated in nature. My country succeeded in doing this through education. And it's always, this topic is on the table because it comes up from education. I don't know if it's still the case, but in our generation, we were educated in such a way. There was an awareness about diversity, about conservation. We were aware and we knew about human action and our influence on the planet. And I think education is paramount. I don't know if technology is so important. We need to be educated for that. If we don't insist on education, we cannot be very optimistic. We might be beaten if we don't do anything. Yes, what you just said is key. Yeah, we live too far from nature. Younger generations don't know about nature. They don't know what it is to live in nature. They live in cities, they use energies, they don't even know where energy comes from. They think that everything is there to stay. They don't know about the consequences. They are very far away from nature. And basically, citizens live in an abstract urban setting. We don't even look at the sky. We just look at our mobile to see what is the weather forecast. But people don't look at the sky. We don't look at clouds anymore. So, education. Yes, it's easier to take the kids to the mountains, to nature, so that they can understand. They need to go and to be in contact with nature. They need to have experience of the world. Youngsters are basically urban people. They live in cities. We are not in contact of nature. We don't understand it. And we live in an abstract world. So going back to nature, looking, living there, observing nature, feeling nature, understanding. We need that connection with nature. We are not separate layers. We are interconnected with nature. That's the secret. We need to understand, and you cannot learn that in a book. You need to go to the mud. You need to be stung by insects. You need to look for food when you're hungry. So going back to nature and education and going back to children.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for your reflections and your contributions and for joining us today. And I would just like to thank the panel for all of your fantastic expertise and comments and thoughts on this area, and just to also remind everybody that we do have an area for drinks, and you can follow us out shortly. So thank you very much, guys.